Hi everybody, welcome to Live Blogger. In this tutorial series, we are creating this onboarding screen for our website using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. So here we can see this is the onboarding screen, and we can go to the next steps over here by clicking on this next button, and then we can finish the steps over here. Now in the previous video, we added the CSS of this onboarding screen, and this is how it looks right now. So we have added the design of the onboarding screen. Now in this video, we're going to add the functionality for this onboarding screen. So right now, if we click on this next button, nothing happens because we haven't added the JavaScript. So in this video, we're going to add the JavaScript. So let's get started. Right here in our HTML file, we can see that we have already linked our JavaScript file over here. Now before getting started with the JavaScript, let's add some classes to the style.css file. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a class called active to this onboarding container when we want it to be displayed. And we're going to remove the active class from the onboarding container when we don't want it to be displayed. So let's go to our style.css file, and if we scroll down, here we can see we have the styles for the onboarding container. So what we're going to do is by default, we will set the position of this onboarding container a little lower than default. So here for the y-axis, let's add a calc function. So I'll just type calc, and here we'll type negative 50% plus, let's say, 15 pixels. Right now we can see it has moved a little bit to the bottom. Let's move it a little bit more. So let's type 25 pixels. And we will also set the opacity to 0. So I'll just type opacity 0. And we'll also add a transition so that we will have smooth animation. So I'll just type transition. And let's set it to all 100 milliseconds ease. And here we will type onboarding container dot active. So when we have the active class, we're going to reset the transform and also the opacity. So I'll just copy this line of code and paste it down here. And I'll just bring it back to negative 50%. I'll just remove this calc function from here. And we'll also set the opacity back to 1. Alright, now let's go back to our index.html file, and in the onboarding container, let's add the class active. And now we can see that the onboarding container is being displayed over here. And if we remove the active class, it is hidden. And we have the same for the onboarding overlay as well. So we have already added the active class. So here we can see for the active class, we are adding the opacity to 1. So if we remove the active class from the onboarding overlay, we can see that the overlay is hidden. Alright, now we're going to add and remove the active class using JavaScript when we click on this onboarding button. So let's reference these three elements in our JavaScript. We need to reference the onboarding button, the onboarding overlay, and the onboarding container. So let's go to our main.js file, and let's type const onboarding button equals document.querySelector, and here I'll just type onboarding button. And the next thing we will reference is the onboarding container. So let's type const onboarding container equals document.querySelector onboarding container. And let's also reference the onboarding overlay. So let's type const onboarding overlay equals document.querySelector and onboarding overlay. Alright, now let's add an event listener to this onboarding button. So let's type onboarding button dot add event listener, and let's listen for the click event, and here we'll create an arrow function. Now here we need to add the active class to this onboarding container and the onboarding overlay. So let's type onboarding container dot class list dot add, and here we'll just type active. And let's also type onboarding overlay dot class list dot add, and here let's type active. Right now let's test it out. So let's click on this button, and now we can see that the onboarding container is being displayed over here. Now the next thing we will do is when we click on the skip button, we want to hide this onboarding container. So let's reference the skip button. So for the skip button, we have this anchor tag with the class of skip btn. So let's target this. So here I'll just type const skip button equals document.querySelector onboarding container skip btn, and let's add an event listener for the skip button. So I'll just type skip btn dot add event listener, and here we'll just type click, and let's create an arrow function over here, and I'll just copy these 2 lines of code and paste it over here, and instead of add I'll just type remove. Right now let's test it out. So let's click on this show demo button, and we have the onboarding screen displayed over here, and let's click on the skip button, and it is hidden, so everything is working all right. I think we need to reduce the transition time for the overlay. So let's go back over here to style.css, and for the onboarding container we have set a transition duration of 100 milliseconds. So let's add the same over here for the overlay. So just have 100 milliseconds. Now let's test it out, and we can see everything works all right. Alright, now the next thing we will do is we will add the functionality for the next button. So let's go to the original design, and let's click on this button. And here we can see we have this next button, and if I click on that, we go to the next step. So we are basically changing the position of the steps. So if you go over here to our CSS, and if you go to steps, here we can see we have set the width to 300%. And here for the content, if I just remove the overflow hidden from here, we can see that the next step is displayed over here on the right. Now we need to position this over here to the left so that the second step is displayed over here. And when we click on the next button, we need to position it even more to the left so that the third step is displayed over here. Now for that, the first thing we need to do is we need to get the width of this single step over here. So we need to reference 2 things from this HTML. So if you go back to our HTML file, here we can see we have this division with the class of steps. So we need to reference this so that we can move it to the left. And we also need to reference the step division inside the steps division, because we need to get the width of this step division so that we can move it in the correct position. And then lastly, we also need to reference this next button. So let's reference all of this in our JavaScript. Let's go over here to the main.js file, and let's type const steps equals document dot query selector all. Now here we are using query selector all because we want to select multiple steps. So here I'll just type onboarding container step. So this will store all the steps inside this steps constant. Now let's reference the container division, which has a class of steps. So I'll just name it steps container. So I'll just type const steps container equals document dot query selector, and here we'll just type onboarding container steps, and then we also need to reference the next button. So let's type const next btn equals document dot query selector onboarding container next btn. Right now let's write the code for the next button. So the first thing we will do is we'll create a variable for storing the position. So let's create a variable called step position, and by default we will set it to 0. Alright, now let's add an event listener for this next button. So here I'll just type next btn dot add event listener, and here I'll just type click, and let's create an arrow function over here. Now what we need to do over here is that we need to move the steps container to the left, and first of all let's get the width of the single step. So here we can see we have already referenced the steps, so all the step divisions are inside the steps constant. So let's get the width of one of the steps. So here I'll just type steps, and I'll just select the first step, and to get the width we can use offset width. And what we will do is we will add this width to this step position. So here I'll just type step position plus equals steps 0 dot offset width. Now the next thing we need to do is move the steps container to the left with this position right here. So let's type steps container dot style dot transform equals translate x, and here we need to add the variable. So I'll just use backticks for this, and here I'll just type negative, and let's add this step position variable over here. So just type dollar symbol, and in parentheses we will type step position, and then we need to type pixels. Right now this should move the steps container to the left and display the next step. So let's test it out. Let's click on the show demo button, and let's click on the next button, and here we can see we have the second step displayed over here. Let's click on the next button once again, and now we have the third step displayed over here. Now we'll also add a transition, so let's go back to our style.css file, and here for the steps I'll just type transition of all to 400 milliseconds ease. Right now let's test it out. So let's click on the show demo button, and let's click on the next button, and we have the transition for the next step, and everything is working alright. Now the next thing we will do is, when we are on the last step, we need to change the text of next to finish. So let's go back to our main.js file, and we'll keep track of the steps displayed over here. So what we'll do is we'll create a new variable, and let's name it current step, and by default we will set it to 0. And whenever we click on the next button, we need to increment the current step variable. So here I'll just type current step plus plus, so this will increment it by 1. Now here we'll create an if condition, so let's type if, and we will check whether the current step is the last step. So let's type current step equals steps, which is this constant with all the steps, and here we'll type dot length, and we also need to type -1 because arrays start from 0. Now this if condition will let us know whether we are on the last step. So if we are on the last step, then whatever is written over here inside this block will be executed. So here we'll just type next btn dot inner html equals, and I'll just set it to finish. Right now let's test it. So let's click on the show demo button, and let's click on the next button, and now let's click on the next button, and here we can see we have this text finish for the last step. Now the next thing we will do is we will add the code for these dots. So we need to change the active state of the dots to the next dots when we go to the next steps. So if you go back to our index.html file, here we can see we have this division with the class of dots, and in that we have these divisions with class dot, and for the first one we have a class of active. Now when we go to the next step, we need to add the active class to the next dot. So first of all, let's go to the style.css file, and let's go to the dots, and here for the dot I'll also add a transition so that we will have smooth animation. So just type transition all 400 milliseconds ease. Alright, now let's go back to our main.js file, and let's reference the dots. So here just type const dots equals document.querySelector all, and here we'll just type onboarding container dot. Right now let's go to the code for the next button, and here we will add the code for the dots. So I'll just type dots, and here in square brackets we need to add the index of the dot that we need to have the active class for. So what we will do is we will use this current step variable because it changes from 0 through the length of the steps. So let's type current step, and here I'll just type dot class list dot add, and we will add a class of active. Alright, now let's click on the show demo button, and let's click on the next button, and let's see whether the dot is changing to the next dot. So let's click on next button, and now we can see we have the active class for the next dot. Let's click on the next button once again, and we have the active class for the third dot. Now we need to remove the active class from the other dots when we have this new active class. So here, before adding the active class, I'll just remove the active class from all the other dots. So let's type dots dot for each to loop through all the dots. So for each of the dot, I'll just call it d, and I'll just create an arrow function over here, and I'll just type d dot class list dot remove, and here I'll just type active. Now this will remove the active class from all the dots before adding the new active class. So let's test it out. Let's click on this show demo button, and let's click on the next button, and we have the dot for the next step, and let's click on the next button, and we have the third dot active. So everything is working alright. Alright, now the last thing we need to do is when we click on the finish button, we need to hide this onboarding container and the overlay. So let's add an if condition over here. So here I'll just type if, and I'll just type current step is greater than or equal to steps.length. So this if condition will tell us whether the steps are over. So here I'll just type onboarding container dot class list dot remove active and onboarding overlay dot class list dot remove active, and we also need to reset the current step variable to 0. Alright, now let's test it out. So let's click on the show demo button and let's click on the next button and next and finish, and we can see that the onboarding container has disappeared. And let's click on the show demo button once again, and here we can see that the onboarding container is being displayed over here, but we don't have the steps displayed over here because we don't have the correct position of the steps. And here we can see we also have the text finish displayed over here. So we will fix all of that. So what we will do is I just remove these 2 lines of code from here inside the onboarding button event listener. So I'll just cut these 2 lines of code and we'll create a function called init, and in that we will add all the lines of code for resetting all the values. So here I'll just create a function called init. First of all, let's paste the 2 lines of code, and the next thing we need to do is set the current step to 0, and then we need to set the step position to 0, and we also need to set the position of the steps container to the step position. So let's copy this line of code from here and let's paste it over here, and we'll also set the text of the next button. So I'll just type next btn.inner html equals, and here I'll just type next. Alright, now let's test it out. So let's click on the show demo button and we have the first step displayed over here. Let's click on the next button and we have the second step, and the dot is also in the correct position. Let's click on the next button and we have the third step displayed over here, and we also have the dot active for the third step. And let's click on finish, and now let's click on show demo and we have the first step displayed over here again, but we can see we had the animation for the step. So we transitioned from step 3 to step 1, so we don't want that to happen when we start our demo. So what we will do is here when we are on the last step, what we will do is we will unset the transition. So I'll just type steps container dot style dot transition equals unset, and what we will do is we'll just copy this line of code and I'll just paste it down here, and we will add the transition back over here. So I'll just type all 400 milliseconds is. Now this is for stopping the animation for the last step. So let's copy this line of code and we'll also paste it in the init. So I'll just paste it right here. Alright, now let's test it out. So let's click on the show demo button and we have the first step displayed over here. Let's click on the next button and we have the second step. Let's click on the next button, we have the third step, and let's click on the finish button and we can see that it goes back. Let's click on the show demo button once more and we have the first step displayed over here. So everything is working alright. Let's click on the next button and now let's click on the skip button and let's see whether we go back to the first step. Let's click on the show demo button and we are going back to the first step, but the dot is active on the second step. So what we'll do is let's go down over here to the next button code and let's copy the code for the dot. So I'll just copy these lines of code and let's paste it over here inside the init. Right, now let's test it out. So let's click on the show demo button and we have the first step. Let's click on the next button and we are on the second step. Let's click on the skip button and let's click on the show demo button once again, and here we can see we are back in the first step and even the dot is active in the correct step. So everything is working alright. So that's basically how you create an onboarding screen for your website using HTML, CSS and JavaScript. Alright, so that's basically it for this video, and I will leave the link of the source code in the description. And if you have any doubts, you can ask in the comments below. And if you like this video, please click on the like button and subscribe to this channel to get the latest video updates. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.